It's pretty rare that I encounter something so incredibly half-baked that it somehow manages to loop around to fascinating train wreck. In this case, we have a combination of products that combine together to create what is quite possibly the single, blandest PC experience one could buy for around $7,000 in 1998. For mediocrity this bad, we have to turn to the legendary Sun Microsystems and this Ultra 10, which, when combined with Sun's PC compatibility board, the SunPCI, opens a world that can be best described as Anyway, as usual, this is your host NCommander, and tonight we're going to see how Sun somehow made a PC compatibility solution about as exciting as filing your taxes. It's rather impressive considering this PC on a PCI card has some rather remarkable compatibility and performance problems despite having a genuine x86 processor at its heart. However, for those not familiar with Sun, it's probably easier to start with a bit of backstory. Sun Microsystems was one of the major brands of Unix workstations and was a powerhouse name through the late 80s and early 90s. However, with the rise of Windows, they, like most of the major Unix vendors, quickly began to lose market share to cheap commodity PCs. While Solaris did have ports of programs like WordPerfect and FrameMaker, it would still often be necessary to have a PC lurking somewhere so you could open that Word document your boss sent you. Sun's solution was to put the cheap commodity PC on an add-on card so you could theoretically get the best of both worlds. At an asking price of only $500 in 1998, you could pop this bad boy into any Sun system with a PCI slot, and then you too could have Windows and Office at the palm of your fingers. And if that's all you needed, well, the Sun PCI isn't that bad. That's not to say it's good, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Fundamentally, the Sun PCI is essentially a single board computer powered by an AMD K6-2 processor. It has independent RAM and video chips and a variety of PC ports including serial, parallel, and USB, meaning the Sun PCI should more or less be fully compatible with any other Intel system. Other things like storage are shared with the host system, thus it's time to introduce you to my Sun Ultra 10. The Ultra 10, along with its little brother, the Ultra 5, were originally announced as lower-cost alternatives to Intel workstations, with the Ultra 5 starting at approximately $4,000 and the Ultra 10 at $7,000. It was the bargain option as far as Unix workstations go, especially when you had companies like IBM pricing their entry-level systems at $10,000 or more. My specific Ultra 10 is one of the later models with an integrated 440 MHz 64-bit UltraSpark 2i processor and currently has half a gigabyte of memory installed. Unfortunately, the 3D accelerator that this system would have had is missing. However, we still have the integrated ATI Rage Pro chip for 2D graphics, which isn't bad at all. I've replaced the NVRAM chip, so unlike many Suns of this era, this system will remember its MAC address and host ID, avoiding a long and tedious programming process at boot. Finishing off the package is a Sun Type 5C keyboard and optical mouse, which I am borrowing from my SparkStation. It's a rubber-domed keyboard, but it's quite nice to type on overall. While these machines generally received favorable reviews back in the day, there's also very little setting it apart from the competition in and of itself. However, it's easy to see how the promise of full PC compatibility at a relatively low cost could have easily kept customers on Sun hardware when they might have otherwise jumped ship. It's also clear that Sun was cutting corners in an effort to keep prices down, something that will become more evident the moment you go to pop the case. To actually open this machine, you need to remove the screws, turn it upside down, and then the bottom lifts off. I mean, why would you make a case like this? Why? Right, anyway, let's talk about storage. As shipped by Sun, this system should have had an 8 or 10 gigabyte IDE hard drive, but when I got it, said drive had been replaced with this 250 gigabyte Maxter drive from 2005. That alone would explain why this system had OpenBSD 7.1 pre-installed when I got it, since OpenBSD doesn't suffer from any of the large drive pitfalls that plague Solaris through this era. Solaris 7, which is what this machine would have shipped with, lacks support for IDE hard drives larger than 32 gigabytes. I do have a copy of Solaris 9, but it's on DVD, and this system only has a CD-ROM drive. Now, I could have solved this problem in an intelligent way, such as buying a DVD-ROM drive, but well, you ever get one of those stupid ideas you just kinda need to see through? After all, if you're trying to spark a Sun back to life, you just need to jumpstart it. Furthermore, if you were a Sun system administrator back in the day, I'd like to formally apologize for digging up this nightmare of yesteryear. Even now, I am wondering why I did this to myself. For those who haven't had the honor, Jumpstart was Sun's network installation and provisioning solution for Solaris. The idea was that you could build a central distribution server which you can then customize and deploy Solaris to any number of Sun machines automatically. I'm going to gloss through the technical details here, but the process involved installing OpenSolaris in a VM, setting up boot services, and hours of fun debugging. It doesn't help that when Jumpstart fails for whatever reason, it tends to hang with no useful output. If, and I'm very much stressing that if, you did everything correctly, you can begin a Jumpstart by typing bootnet-install and watching the system begin to slowly start off the network, or perhaps burst into flames. It's kinda an either-or sort of thing. Also, I can't help but feel that if I had to do this while incorporating a full NIS or NIS Plus setup, I'd probably lose my mind. So maybe a future video folks want it. Let me know below. Anyway, Solaris' installation is mostly graphical in nature, and normally is pretty simple and straightforward. Had it worked as advertised, I'd probably gloss through this entire section. After going through basic configuration questions, we can see Netscape fire up in the background, and then we're brought to Sun's WebStart installer, which is basically the 2000s version of Electron apps. Under normal circumstances, installation at this point would have mostly been clicking next a bunch of times, but spoiler alert, that wasn't the case here. The installer is only seeing about 500 megabytes of hard drive space, and the remaining 249.5 gigabytes have buggered off somewhere. Obviously, something has gone wrong. At this point, I can exit the installer and click on the background to open a pop-up window which will let me start a terminal or Netscape if I was so inclined. Running the format command here reveals the problem. To make a long story short, Solaris 9 actually struggles with IDE hard drives larger than 137 gigabytes in size. I presume the only way to use all 250 gigabytes would be to use Solaris 10 or later, but that's a bit newer than I'm willing to go. I artificially limited the drive in size, which finally got things rolling. At this point, I'm going to let the installer run, do system configuration, install add-on software, and get everything we need to get the SunPCI card running, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the time lapse. For you, it's been less than a minute, but for me, that was about a day's worth of effort. However, we're now ready to start playing with PC compatibility. Everything is done through the SunPCI program, which on first run, we're prompted to create a hard drive image up to 8 gigabytes in size. Disk images are stored in the user's home folder, and there are no sparse images here. Every drive image you make will consume all the space it needs right at creation. After waiting for the progress bar to reach the end, the screen clears and we get what appears to be entirely normal BIOS messages showing that the card is alive and has a dead battery. Oops. Let me fix that. It wouldn't be a retro PC experience if I didn't have to change a battery. And done. We get messages relating to IDE hard drives that I recommend you all keep in mind, and then surprisingly, we get dumped straight to a DAWs prompt. New hard drives created in SunPCI actually do have an operating system pre-installed, specifically Caldera's OpenDAWs 7, which itself is a rebadged version of DRDAWs. While this is a pretty bare-bones environment, Sun did include one add-on command, SunPCNet, which lets you mount Unix file systems as virtual drives. Now, given the age and general lack of information about this card, I wanted to run some diagnostic and benchmarks before doing anything. When researching this, I had read that as compared to a real PC, performance was, well, lacking is the word I'm going with. As such, I copied over the DAWs benchmark pack as well as a few games from GOG.com and got to testing. What I found was that almost everything was broken, at least as far as graphics modes go. Programs would either crash or display incorrectly, such as Doom being split across the middle. Of the games I tested, Ultima 6 was the best behaved, but even then it showed considerable graphic artifacts, slowdown, and tearing. There was also a distinct lack of sound. As best I can tell, if you want to get sound output from the SunPCI, you need to connect speakers directly to it. There's no pass-through to the Sun sound system as far as I can tell. In fact, there's no mention of sound at all in the very thin manual either. However, let's load up Tyrion and you can see for yourself how bad this is. This is, quite frankly, a dreadful experience. However, the manual did give me a small hint on how to make things better. Remember how the back of the card had a dedicated VGA port? Well, let me get a second monitor out and show you what that does. If I pass the VGA switch at startup, video output is redirected to the second monitor, and it becomes immediately apparent that this drastically improves performance and compatibility. At this point, most of the benchmark tests now ran, including the Quake time demo in high resolution mode. That, combined with surprisingly decent Sound Blaster compatibility, led to a not as hard as you'd expect gaming experience. Okay, so it can play DAWs games somewhat decently if you hook it up to an external monitor or use a video switcher. I'd say the experience is a bit worse than DawsBox, but I suspect there was at least one C-level executive who used one of these to play their old copy of Lynx 386. However, it's pretty easy to claim that running DAWs games on the SunPCI is fundamentally missing the point. After all, it was meant as a Windows compatibility solution, so let's try that next. Let's start with the basics. According to the last revision of the manual, Sun officially supported Windows 95, 98, NT4, and 2000. Since the NT versions of Windows were much more popular in corporate environments, I thought it best to start there. However, if you try to install it through any of the normal methods, you'll end up at a blue screen stating inaccessible boot device before long. This is our first real glimpse that this PC compatibility solution isn't as compatible as you might expect. What you're supposed to do is run a program called setup W2K, which starts copying files to the hard drive. This also patches the Windows 2000 installer files and then kicks off an automated install. For the next 20 minutes or so, this ran without any input from me. It's already clear that Sun had tinkered with things, but that becomes much more evident during the second stage installer when the background image suddenly changed to a picture of the SunPCI card itself. However, things take a decidedly more broken turn when we're finally prompted to start entering settings. There's a lack of mouse support while in the installer, which is something that Sun notes as an expected problem in their documentation. It's possible to tab your way through these screens, but I'm still wondering how they considered this shippable. After meandering my way through the settings pages, we're once again left watching progress bars as the install grinded away. Half an hour later, I was finally thrown to a login screen and then the desktop. With the system installed, we can see some relatively nice quality of life features. For example, the cursor can cross in and out of the window boundary without issue. The clipboard is also shared between Windows 2000 and Solaris. As far as guest additions go, this isn't half bad. It's also possible to mount folders from Solaris as network drives into Windows, although this has some problems. I only managed to get it to work by using the Map Network Drive option, and even then, I had the occasional lockup while doing so. Furthermore, the SunPCI provides an Ethernet interface that's bridged to the network stack on the Solaris side. In theory, this should have just worked, but I found I had to set a stack IP before the packets would flow. It was during this initial exploration that I noticed that the C drive was only 2 GB in size, despite having created an 8 GB disk image. I had hoped that setup W2K would have resized the boot partition, but it was not meant to be. In fact, Sun's official solution on using all the disk space allocated is to go out and buy Partition Magic 5 and use that to resize the file system. You know, because their own built-in tools can't do it. Adding insult to injury, this is actually worse than it seems because Sun's disk drivers cause Windows' built-in disk manager to stop functioning. That means it's impossible to add a large disk partition without third-party software. I've got to say, it takes effort to fail this hard, so I should probably commend Sun for really going above and beyond here. Now, at this point, I would normally do some weird or quirky thing and end the video, but I ran into a rather unique problem. The SunPCI's performance was so poor, I actually struggled to do anything beyond the absolute basics. In this state, running Office really did feel like the upper limit of what you could do, and even then it felt very slow and laggy at times. Okay, if the windowed mode is that bad, what about using the VGA option to use the dedicated video port? Well, if you try it as is, you'll see boot messages on the second LCD, and then it suddenly cuts back to displaying in the SunPCI window, despite saying that the video is routed to an external device. From the documentation, it seems like you're supposed to be able to get this to work by changing the video driver, but I didn't have much luck. After switching out the driver, I found that I had lost mouse support entirely, and I had no luck in bringing it back. Between this and the installer's own mouse hiccups, I have this feeling Windows 2000 support was a little half-baked. I suppose it makes sense. Windows 2000, despite the name, came out in 1999, while the SunPCI came out in 1998. So, what about other versions of Windows? Well, from reading the manual, I actually got the impression that Windows 95 and 98 might be better behaved. However, if there's an ideal guest OS, Windows 98 2nd Edition certainly isn't it. The installation blue screened multiple times, and I had to do some significant hand-holding to make things work. It seemed okay after I got the SunPCI drivers installed, but getting that far was not a walk in the park. Just to be fair, I also tried NT4. Like 2000, this required a dedicated setup program, and getting VGA output requires fiddling with drivers. Furthermore, under NT4, there's no support for USB. That said, the mouse worked just fine. However, the experience wasn't much better overall. I would have liked to give some more solid benchmark numbers to show how bad this really is, but that proved to be a much bigger problem than expected. Every time I tried to run something like Windstone, the SunPCI would abort or in some cases lock up. What I can say subjectively is that the entire experience sucks. In normal operation, I'd honestly say an early Pentium is likely to be far more responsive and less frustrating for basic office tasks, and it's really at the point that I have to question if software emulation would provide a better experience overall. That's even true if you were using the dedicated video output. The experience with that is best described as less terrible, but the very lackluster SIS graphics chip is going to leave you disappointed. In short, the SunPCI was very much the solution to running Office on Solaris and not very much else. That being said, it wouldn't be an NCommander video if I didn't try to push it to the limit. So the question becomes, what could I do to properly create a cursed computing experience? I did have one idea in mind, but to pull it off, I was going to need to be running Windows XP. I had some slight hope this might be possible since Windows 2000 wasn't that different from XP. Unfortunately, my attempts to coax setup W2K into installing XP failed miserably. Even after working out how to manually slipstream the necessary drivers in XP, it would simply blue screen. As I would find out later, the SunPCI's bridge and EM disk driver files appear to be incompatible with XP. I was starting to lose hope, but out of curiosity, I decided to look at the driver package for the SunPCI's successor, the SunPCI 2. Sun's marketing was really stretching themselves thin on this product line. My hope was that there was a Windows XP setup utility similar to Setup W2K, which would have provided some insight into getting this to work. As luck would have it, there was a dedicated Setup WXP binary, and on something of a lark, I ran it as is, not really expecting much. You can imagine my surprise that not only did the install start, it actually ran through to completion. However, this unexpected victory was short-lived because not long after, Windows XP started boot looping. However, it was clear that we were almost there. I actually found that I could start in safe mode, but nothing I did seemed to make a difference. It didn't take me too long to remember that Windows XP automatically reboots on a blue screen, which is why I wasn't seeing any errors. Disabling that revealed that we were dying with a new stop code, file system, which suggested that something had gone seriously wrong. Now, obviously, I'm in well unsupported territory here, but it does tell me that Sun essentially recycled the design of the SunPCI 1 for its successors. I wouldn't have been able to get this far otherwise. The SunPCI 2, from what little I could find about it online, had a faster processor and a different graphics chip, but obviously not much else had changed. It didn't take too much longer to notice that there were now debug messages being printed out on the Solaris side of things. It seems the new bridge driver from the SunPCI 2 was having problems with the old SunPCI 1 program. I did try swapping in the SunPCI 1 versions of bridge.sys and emdisk.sys, but that just led to the old inaccessible boot device error message. It was at this point that I was wondering if I could just use the SunPCI 2 software and Solaris drivers against the SunPCI 1 card. This would solve several issues, and well, the answer is yes, it is actually possible. I had to modify the install scripts to change hard-coded PCI IDs, but I was able to force load the SunPCI 2 driver on Solaris and then run the updated SunPCI binary successfully. On first startup, I got a warning saying SunPCI 1 hard drives were not supported. After resolving that, I was then prompted to create a new hard drive with lots of new options such as Windows XP and TFS. After waiting for the usual round of progress bars crawling against the screen, there was a post beep and then the SunPCI started up. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. The updated SunPCI 2 software also provided a new simplified install environment, which errored out one screen in, which was an ominous start to things. That said, I was still able to start setup WXP manually, and once again, things seemed to be more or less working. However, towards the tail end of the graphical installation, something broke. The system had gone to a black screen, and the Sun PCI window had resized itself to be tens of thousands of pixels large. Something had obviously broken, but unlike before, I had a decent idea as to what. While it was becoming clear that the Sun PCI 1 and 2 were very similar, one thing that I knew had changed was the graphics chip. Going through the driver files, I carefully modified the installer to disable loading the Sun PCI 2 video driver. Then, once again, I let the install process run. After almost 3 hours, you could say I was in bliss when I finally saw bliss pop up in wonderful 16-color mode. I had successfully managed to install Windows XP on the Sun PCI 1. It's really these moments that make the entire project worth it. Getting the video working properly wasn't as easy as I would have hoped, but I did manage it in the end. Afterwards, I managed to have full color bliss and a really horrible performance. It seems Windows XP's more colorful Luna theme was very much taxing the pass-through video mode. Still, we were now finally ready for that last bit of cursed computing. As I said, I had an idea in mind that needed XP. You might have been wondering what that was. Well, if you've watched the channel for a while, you might remember when I did my first video on Sun Solaris 7, I didn't have any Spark hardware at the time and had to run it in Cume. Cume, meanwhile, has supported emulating a Spark station for almost a decade at this point, and there was a comfortable period of overlap where XP host support and Spark station emulation coexisted. You might see where I'm going with this. Just one slight problem. It didn't work. Cume errored out with a fatal exception. After debugging this for a while, it appears Cume requires a Pentium Pro or better processor with the C move instruction, something the AMD K6-2 lacks. I could probably recompile Cume and fix this if I was absolutely determined to get this to work, but that was a rather daunting task on a project that had fought me every step of the way. And well, there comes a time where you know you've tempted fate a bit too much. That, and it was proving far too much of a pain to be worth bothering with. And honestly, that sentiment alone sums up the entirety of my feelings about the Sun PCI. On that note, if you've enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you really enjoyed this video, consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. As always, this is NCommander signing out and wishing you all a pleasant day.